Natalie.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure.
And thank you for all your teaching. I really appreciate it.
You got it.
Can you still hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I recently wrapped up teaching Daniel at church, and I pulled out the Apocalypse Code to reference. And either I missed it or I just couldn't seem to find it in the book where at the very end of the chapter, the Antichrist. But my question to you would be, would that be in reference to not Antiochus Epiphanes, but is that Nero? Is that what you were explaining from other references of the Bible? Is that the same kind of prophecy, or
yes?
am I missing something?
No, there's a real correlation between what's going on in Daniel chapter 11 and what's going on in the book of Revelation. And Jesus points to that in Matthew 24 when he talks about the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. Let the reader understand. So Jesus is pointing back to the great tribulation that took place under the Old Testament Antichrist, or beast, as he's called in Daniel, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who not only effectively caused the murder of Onias III, who was the high priest, but then for 7 years terrorized the Jews. In 169, I believe, he stole many of the great and glorious vessels from the temple. And in 168, he fell upon Jerusalem in a great rage. In 167, he caused the desecration of the temple by building a pagan altar and desecrating the temple by sacrificing unholy things upon the altar. And then for 3 years, he pillaged Jerusalem and he slaughtered Jews until finally you have freedom for the Jews under Judas Maccabeus. So you have a 3-year, very significant tribulation, a little more than 3 years, as a matter of fact. The tribulation rages until finally in 164, Antiochus IV Epiphanes dies. Now, Jesus points back at this, and of course, as you probably well know, Hanukkah is being celebrated as a direct reference back to freedom for the Jews under Judas Maccabeus. So now Jesus looks back at what happened under Antiochus, a beast in Daniel, to look forward to what is going to happen when Jerusalem is being desecrated and defiled. But in this case, the temple and Jerusalem are not only going to be desecrated, but in this case, the temple and Jerusalem is going to be utterly destroyed in the most ghastly fashion imaginable. And so Jesus points back to a tribulation to look forward to a tribulation which would end with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple.
Okay. So if he's looking forward to that, what is he referring to?
Well, he's very clearly looking forward to what is going to happen with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple.
Okay.
So here's how you can look at this. The book of Daniel prophetically looks forward to the coming of Messiah. As prophesied by Jeremiah, Jerusalem would experience a partial restoration after 70 years of exile.
Yes.
But as revealed through the angel Gabriel, the return from exile was merely a type of the antitypical freedom that would be experienced through Judas Maccabeus, which itself was typological of ultimate restoration through Jesus the Messiah. So the 77s of Daniel encompass 10 Jubilee eras and represent the extended exile of the Jews, which would end in the fullness of time, you might say the quintessential Jubilee, when the people of God would experience ultimate redemption and restoration, not in a holy city turned harlot, but in a holy Christ.
Yes.
So
Okay.
Jesus, who came in the fullness of time, looks back at the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel as the basis for prophesying that the temple that had been desecrated by the forces of Antiochus would ultimately be destroyed by the forces of Antichrist. That's why Jesus says, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And so as to leave no doubt regarding the time of his coming, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So here's what's going on. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus took the quintessential Jewish nightmare, he extends it to cosmic proportions, because in the fullness of time, what Jesus declared desolate was desolate by Roman infidels. They destroy the temple fortress and they end the daily sacrifice. And this time the blood that desolated the sacred altar would not flow from the carcasses of unclean pigs, like in the Old Testament, Daniel, but from the corpses of unbelieving Pharisees. And this time the Holy of Holies was not merely desecrated by the defiling statue of a pagan god, but was manifestly destroyed by the pathetic greed of despoiling soldiers. And this time, there was no Judas Maccabeus that would be there to intervene. Within a generation, the temple was not just desecrated, it was destroyed, just as Jesus said it would be. So Jesus looks back at one abomination to look forward to another, and that would be the end of the temple. And the reason for this is clear. The Jews did not accept Messiah in their midst, and therefore they wanted to continue with temple, priest, and sacrifice when the ultimate sacrificial lamb had come, and there was no longer any need for temple, priest, and sacrifice. And then, of course, within that context, you have the Jews who had become followers of Jesus Christ, who now take the gospel throughout the world. Jerusalem is no longer the destination point. It is the world, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. So the disciples are told to leave Jerusalem and not entertain the thought of returning, but go to the ends of the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ.